Welcome to another episode of the Fascia Masters podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a very highly requested topic, which is exercise. And a lot of people who start a fascia decompression technique or they do block therapy, they always want to know, can I still exercise? When should I exercise? When is the appropriate time to exercise? Are there consequences to my fascia when I exercise? So we're going to be covering a lot of these questions, a lot of these topics. And let's just dive on right in. So Deanna, let's start with you. You have been doing this for a very long time, as our listeners know, but what is your perspective on fascia and exercise? And give us a little history of what you've really done with your body in retrospect to fascia and exercise.
Well, that's a great question, Quinn. So to begin, I want to jump back to when I was in my 20s before I really understood the fascia system and how I was utilizing exercise to attempt to create the proper size and shape, create the proper health, the strength in my body. And it was actually a very frustrating time because I was trained as an athletic therapist. So of course I'm working with elite athletes and I'm applying to my body what I had learned through this process. And I mean, I was an athlete as a teenager as well. I was a provincial volleyball player. I was a Highland dancer. So activity, movement was a big part of my life. But then when I got into my 20s and I moved away from the sports and the dance, now I'm using exercise more as controlling my size and shape. So I would be running, I would be doing weights, aerobics. I did Tai Bo for a while. I got onto the stair climber. And what I really observed through this process was how frustrating it was because I was not getting the results that I was wanting to get for my body. One of my biggest goals was to lose weight. I don't even like to call it losing weight anymore as I've understood the fascia system more. I like referring more to managing your size and shape because at the end of the day, the more that I was exercising and dieting, the bigger I was getting. So one of the most important things I think to understand is with regard to calories in versus energy expenditure out, why wasn't this working for me? I was definitely eating less calories per day than I was using with my body, yet I was compressing more, I was ballooning more, I was becoming more toxic. I remember there was one moment when I was doing 400 sit-ups a day. Well, and we can have a whole discussion on why that was totally wrong.
Do you know what kind of food, do you remember what kind of food you were eating at that time or even how much you were eating?
Well, I mean, I was dieting, right? So probably everything I was doing back then was wrong, like low fat. Like now I recognize we need fats for the body to actually function properly. So I was on a low fat diet. I would be drinking things like Diet Coke. Like I drank liters of Diet Coke. So we also know that that's toxic. So cells are going to expand with those types of chemicals in the body. So recognizing that, yes, my methods of dieting at that time were completely inconsistent with health. However, that's what was advertised, right? Like Diet Coke, 1 calorie or less. So I'm literally drinking liters of this per day. Thinking that, I'm getting some kind of sense of fullness through this liquid. But I mean, yeah, so that's a whole different conversation. So really what was happening, so the harder that I was working, the more I was compressing because I recognized I wasn't breathing properly. It wasn't until I really started the practice of yoga when I had a wonderful teacher, and every 30 seconds or so, she would remind us to breathe. And every time she reminded us to breathe, I recognized that I was breathing in that incorrect upper chest kind of way, but I was holding my breath a lot through these motions and actions. And suddenly I was like, wow, this is keeping my body frozen. It was when I had that first moment of that anxiety attack when I really brought all of this information together in my mind to track a course to be able to manage my size and shape differently. But yes, so when I would be running, I'd be sweating like crazy. My belly would still be cold. When I would do 400 sit-ups, my belly would actually extend and expand, where in my mind, I'm thinking, I've got to tighten these muscles. But yet the more that I compressed, the more I pulled my body out of alignment, creating more compression, more ballooning. So through this whole journey, I was becoming more toxic inside. I was having other issues. I remember one time I decided I'm going to do something completely different. So I gave myself 30 days I went to the gym and I did 45 minutes of really high stair climbing, you know, and so I had this pair of jeans that were a little tight, and I thought, I'm going to do this for 30 days and I'm not going to try these jeans on until I'm done. And then I'm going to feel really good when I put them on. So, I mean, every day after work, I'd go and I would do 45 minutes and I'm dripping wet, right? So I finished the 30 days. I tried to put those jeans on, and as if they weren't even tighter. And if you can imagine how they were tighter, my legs got bigger.
For sure.
Because of all that muscle building. Yeah. Yet the goal was okay. And I mean, in the time I was trained that, you know, the more muscle mass, the higher your metabolism. So all of these things are going through your head. And yet all of my efforts continue to take me down a path where I was less happy with my body. In fact, I remember one time I was doing 100 push-ups a day because I wanted to have these really awesome sculpted looking arms. And then at one point, my mom said to me, your head is too small for your shoulders, which was not my goal. I didn't want to look like a football player. I wanted to look like that ballerina body, which completely wasn't the body that I had. But nonetheless, my efforts took me in a direction opposite to where I wanted to go. So it was with that initial understanding of yoga and proper breathing that I started to tie everything together, because all of my efforts were making my body more frozen because I wasn't breathing. So the cells that I had available were expanding and becoming more toxic with the diet foods I was eating, as opposed to releasing that compression that was creating that ballooning, as well as detoxifying, because that's how we change our body, through improving flow. So my efforts took away the flow. It created bulk, but that bulk stored everything. And so not only did I not look the way I wanted to look, I also felt awful because, again, I was toxic. I was full of inflammation, and yeah, there was nothing good that came from that form of exercise for my body.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a good story, because I think a ton of people can relate to that as well. And they try all of these mainstream diets or extreme forms of exercise with the hopes that they're gonna lose weight, or for some guys or people or anyone really, to gain muscle. So let's kind of break this into weight loss and strength training / building muscle a bit, just to kind of simplify it for our listeners. So when it comes to weight loss, sure, there's the whole calories in versus calories out. That is scientifically proven to a degree, but like, yeah, absolutely, you need to burn more calories than you take in. Metabolism does play a role. Toxification plays a role. Posture, alignment, breathing. Like, there's a lot encompassing losing weight. So this is what makes it such a good conversation. So let's start off with this study, because we've done this a ton. We talk about this a lot. So the Medical News in Australia did a study and proved that 84% of weight loss is excreted through the exhalation phase of the breath. And that's really interesting. So the first time I heard that, I'm like, oh, then just like exhale more. And yes, like that's going to be a massive benefit, but the exhalation isn't necessarily what's burning the calories. The exhalation is how efficient your body is to remove that from the body. So it's the movement that can help, is what they're saying in the study, to kind of like fire everything up, get the calories, let's call it, burned. But if you're not exhaling that properly, then you're not actually removing it from your body. So it's really like the vehicle, the exhalation is the vehicle to remove this from the body. But if you have a terrible vehicle that's breaking down and you're breathing through the muscles in your upper chest, good luck. Like, that's probably a big reason why it's not working for you. But that's only one factor. Like, there's so many more factors to this. So of course you need to move, you need to breathe properly. Let's just to tie this in, let's also talk about posture. Like, we need to position ourselves properly. And we did a recent episode on posture versus cellular alignment. And cellular alignment is really our goal, to have ourselves positioned in the rightful place, because they're supposed to be in a particular position for optimal functioning. And if we are completely out of alignment, we're literally blocking flow to and from the cells. So how can we effectively deliver the nutrients to the cells and remove the waste and the toxins from the cell? Well, if you're compressed, literally, and you're blocking roadways, literally, good luck. Like, it's going to be a lot more challenging. And that could have been a big reason for you why you couldn't lose weight as well, because your posture might have been bad. You might have not been performing these exercises correctly, and you could have been training yourself further out of alignment, and that all adds up.
Well, and for me, I really recognize how when I was younger, it was the information to hold your belly in. I was a dancer. So, that was the instruction. Like, you don't want to see a big belly on a dancer. So hold that belly in. But okay, when you give that information, you're holding it in, and then you have to breathe through the muscles of the upper chest. So you actually actively train your body to breathe in correctly, thinking that, okay, well, this is going to make me look like I've got the smallest version of the waist that I have. So, but here's the challenge, because again, the diaphragm is the foundation of the rib cage. So if we're breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, this foundation is weak, we fall in. So the more I hold my belly in to try to make it look small, the weaker the diaphragm becomes, the more compressed and ballooned we get. And then we have this whole distortion of what is going on in the abdomen, because now with this collapse, I am pulling the organs away from their correct space. So now we're not digesting food well, we're not absorbing it, we're also not eliminating it. So we become compressed, ballooned, and toxic. And then there's the whole concept of now we're not eliminating the waste properly. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I did an interview with Sinclair Canale, who we mentioned, and I believe she said the average person has 20 to 40 pounds of waste in their colon that isn't moved.
That high?
That high.
This is a recent conversation?
Yes, this was just, we haven't even uploaded it yet on our YouTube channel, but we will. But yes, so it's fascinating because, I mean, that's a huge amount. And it's not as though it's like, whole pieces of feces. It's the waste that's now lining everything and getting locked and the pockets away. So when we do cleanses and you see all of this, like, what just left my body? That's the stuff that's been stuck inside for a really long time. Yeah. And that continues to add up if we're not doing these regular cleanses. So that's what I really recognized was happening with my body, because I had trained this unconscious upper chest breath trying to hold my belly in. I actually went in the opposite direction to what I was wanting. And then as I'm running and I'm breathing in this way, and as I'm doing weights and I'm working, I've got a whole body that is riddled with adhesion that I am now reinforcing and creating those grooves of fascia in that negative alignment. So I'm compressing and ballooning even more. And again, the more compressed we are, the more toxic we become, because we don't have that ability to pull the waste out and toxic cells expand. So that was my experience with my body. And I recognize not everybody has that experience, because some people are better breathers, right? Like, it really comes down to that breath. If you've been a good breather lifelong, you're going to have a different situation than somebody that has a frozen breath to begin with when they're really starting this process. And I mean, really, for me, I can recognize when this whole thing happened. And I had a horrendously traumatic event when I was 17 years old. And that was when my body really, took a turn for the worse. So those traumatic events also put us in freeze mode. And then if we don't release the trauma from that moment, then we continue to move forward from that place of lack of breath, which again creates more compression, more ballooning, because as soon as we lose that breath, gravity wins, we compress, and now we just expand in directions we don't want to. Yeah.
And also it was Highland dancing.
Yes.
So I remember you talk a lot about how your feet are more so positioned externally.
Yeah.
Like a duck.
That's right.
So now if you're standing like that, because that's not anatomical alignment, and if you're standing like that for an hour a day, let's say to start off, like just when you're doing your dance, but then that develops a habit, and then that creates the grooves of fascia, so it's just easier for you to stand like that. And majority of people, when I still look around, they're standing like a duck. And you taught me a lot how that's where the connective tissue will start to roll. So a lot of people who have bigger thighs or bigger inner thighs, that's the connective tissue that started to migrate. And you'll notice a lot of people that have big thighs, they have more so of that posterior pelvic tilt where the glutes almost look like they're being pulled into that area as well. And then their back's taking a ton of compression and a ton of weight daily just to carry themselves, because they're not integrating the glutes and the proper muscles. And that just starts building up. And also there's major issues of having too much of an anterior pelvic tilt as well, but we won't get into all that. So there, you can just see already from you starting with your feet to how that changes your calves, changes the alignment of your thighs. That creates bulk. Then that creates a specific tilt in the pelvis. You might lose the butt, and then you develop that collapse in the rib cage. Then that causes the protruding in the belly. The shoulders internally rotate, the head and the neck protrude forward. Then you have a dowager's hump. Then people think, oh, all this fat climbed up into my back. No, this is all displaced connective tissue. Sure, fat is caught up in the mix, but really posture is such a crucial component because we see it all the time in our community. I'll even see it when I was prepping for a lot of bodybuilding shows. It was my first one I did. I had glove handles I was still working on, and Deanna's like, you need to block this area. And it was more in like my TFL area. And for reference, that's right between your ASIS bone and your hip bone, that TFL. And I worked kind of all throughout that area. When I released it, it's amazing how much my core lengthened and looked like that fluid that was caught there, some of the fat, or we'll call it displaced fascia or compression, started to decompress, elongate, and then flush it out. So that was amazing how that worked. And yeah, so far we've covered the breath, how important that is. We mentioned calories in versus calories out and posture. So a lot of people are going to mention metabolism.
I was just going to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, because, and that's important because so metabolism, I believe, is like defined. It's a chemical process that converts food into energy. So they'll say, well, if you have more muscle, you're going to be burning more calories even at rest. And I think that's a true statement to a degree, but I think there's more to the equation than that.
Well, and that's where we have to get really specific with what we're talking about with more muscle, because if we are building, like let's say we only have 50% of our cells in use because we have adhesions riddled throughout that aren't basically integrated for activity. So we're starting, let's say, with 50% of our cells. So then we start to strengthen because our goal is to get bigger. So we are really only focusing on the 50% of the cells that we have access to strengthen. And if we want to get bigger, the goal is to make them as big as possible, if that's the goal, right? So as we do that, we're simply causing the actual cell to expand. What we really want to do is we want to integrate all of the cells to then expand, as opposed to only a few of them, because
exactly,
eventually they're going to become exhausted and break down. So also, if we only have 50% of our cells with hungry mouths, that's the metabolism that we have. And then as we continue to age and we develop more adhesions, there's less mouths that are hungry, causing that metabolism to slow down.
So what you're referring to is it's not just gain more muscle, it's awaken more cells, because you view the cells as the mouths to eat the food, essentially, and to use that, convert it to ATP, which is energy, so that we can actually use that properly and then take the waste away.
Yes. So that's why when we're dealing with fascia decompression, we want to understand the goal. And the goal is to bring those cells back to correct alignment, because when we have all of our cells working on our behalf, then we have that ease of flow of nutrients in, that oxygen in to feed that ATP. That's the energy, right? Like it's the fuel for the cell, as well as to take everything away. And that's the key. If we have cells pulled out of alignment and we're exercising from that space, we are going to continue to collapse and decrease the number of cells that our body are using. And then that's why we see people, even Arnold Schwarzenegger had a heart attack at the age of 50, right? Like, and you look at this body who was so beautiful and, he won all these things and he was just stunning to see, but yet he wasn't utilizing his breath the way that he should have been in order to be able to feed and fuel all those cells. And eventually his body, hit that point where there was no more capacity and he ended up having an event like that. So we want to exercise for quality and longevity. Like that really should be the goal. Unfortunately, like myself in my 20s, I was exercising for the moment. I wanted to be skinnier, I
think that's probably the main reason why people initially train, and then you mature a bit and realize, wow, this isn't really the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, we want to wake up and we want to feel good. We want to be able to continue to move through our life. For me at 54, what's lovely is I have greater flexibility in a symmetrical way than I did when I was in my 20s, because it's all about putting that space back. So that's another component of exercise, is range of motion, flexibility. If you want to be able to be that great golfer, if you have decreased range of motion in your shoulder or your rib cage, your game will be compromised. So no matter what your goals are for exercise, really, cell alignment is the key to change what's going on in how your body functions, in how it looks, and in just how you feel in your mind. Because I remember when I was working so hard and I was congested, and then there's that feeling of failure when you don't get the results, even though that you're working. And then that's a mind game. And then that causes you to restrict the breath even more. And we get pulled into these dark holes of despair when we're not getting the results, especially when you're putting that time in. So for the listeners who are dedicated to putting the time into exercise, understanding how to decompress your fascia, connect to those proper foundations, and then exercise from that place going forward. And it's not like we have to be perfect to start that, because of course, I mean, none of us ever will be perfect, but to have conscious awareness when using your body from that place of stability with the foundation. Because if we're lifting heavy objects and our root isn't nice and stable, your back's going to go out. Like, it's going to happen because you don't have that floor to support what the rest of the body's doing. So that's where it's just so important to take that moment. So for people starting this process that are high exercise, time-wise, it would be good to give yourself a moment and to kind of dive in and give yourself maybe a month to just dedicate to releasing the old patterns and integrating new patterns before going back to strengthening, because you're just going to continue to reinforce those negative grooves if you're strengthening from this place of imbalance.
Yeah, and that can be difficult to do, especially if you've been in the gym, weight training, doing cardio, whatever your thing is, and you've been doing that for a year, 5, 10, 20 years, however long. It's hard to just stop for a month. But I think there's so much more of a benefit of doing that than you think. And a lot of people think, okay, if I just stop weight training or doing my exercise, whatever it is, for an entire month, I'm going to lose all of this progress that I made. And really, that's not true. It's amazing how fast and how brilliant your body is, where maybe it really is craving that rest. Like, yes, you obviously want to move, you want to perform movements, you want to do resistance training, you want to do these things. But you need to also understand the balance of your body and the repair process as well. And you're not going to lose all of this progress at once. Now, if you're someone who is a little bit, sorry if I'm calling you stubborn, because I can be a little stubborn at times too. I like doing my weight training. I like doing my certain activities. But this is where I had to strip my ego so much, because I started dropping the weight. But then the more you learn, the more you realize you need to start from literally like zero, and you need to start rebuilding your foundations from there. And let's say block therapy, fascia decompression wasn't a thing. It would be so challenging to be able to start training the muscles in the fascia correctly without a fascia decompression technique. So just having this tool, the block, fascia decompression, all this knowledge makes it a million times easier to be able to retrain your fascia, retrain how your muscles move, the biomechanics of the body, compared to if you didn't have a fascia decompression technique. So starting just with, let's just say, the starter package to make it nice and simple, and then integrating some of these foundations. I show a lot of this on the YouTube channels, and we have this also like in the membership as well. But you really have to work on these micro movements if you want to start rebuilding things. Because let's say you squat once a week, twice a week. You do deadlifts. We do deadlifts every day. We squat every day, just picking things up, getting up and down from the couch, whatever we're doing. And we don't have to be as conscious of how we're doing that compared to throwing 200 pounds, 300 pounds on our back. But you still want to be conscious, because the more conscious you are throughout the day, the more you can integrate that into the gym. So releasing the connective tissue, as you mentioned, to start throughout the entire body is crucial, because now you already, but but you have to also understand you released it. You haven't taught it the new alignment. So now you have to start training the new alignment. And this is where it can get a little tricky. That's why we talk a lot about how the third component, which is the foundations, which is posture, is the most difficult part of the process of, we'll call it block therapy, because you need to create space, which is releasing it through fascia decompression, inflate space, proper breathing, and then maintain space through proper posture. So first thing you need to do is understand what is proper posture, because you really integrate a lot of this throughout the day and into the gym throughout a lot of movements. But this is where you have to break down and also make it simple so that you can actually do it and integrate this into whatever weight training you're doing. Because I was doing so much wrong, and I realized, why are my traps still so tight? And it's not that they're necessarily just tight. It's probably because there is a weakness elsewhere in my body where my muscles had to go into almost like a spasm in an attempt to create stability in a joint because the joint was unstable. And that's what the body will do. But now you do that. Now it's like that for however long. Now the fascia becomes tight. It gets used to that alignment. So that's why you have to release, retrain, and strengthen. And that can take a lot of time.
And most importantly, we need to understand the feet, because every time we're standing, the way that the fascia manipulates the feet out of alignment creates what's going to happen everywhere up the chain. So we have this one program in our membership, the Pronator Corrector series. It is so important because what we're doing in that series is we're releasing the way the fascia has gripped and manipulated the toes. So we've got exercises to release that. And then we're taking our time to strengthen the muscles in the feet, because if we have correct feet, we have correct knees, hips, everything up the chain. And what I really see when I'm looking at these bodies, myself included, because again, we're dominant on one side, so we tend to roll one way or another. And you know, the calcaneus bone is this round bone. It's like this little rocker. So if we're pronated, that bone is going to be manipulated, or if we're supinated, either way, we want to have a neutral ankle. So spending time on the areas to strengthen, and this is where it gets tricky, because most people don't look at their feet and say, oh, I want to change the look of my feet and make them look stronger. So like, you don't go to the gym and say, I'm going to work out my feet today. Yeah. You're going to work out your biceps or your chest or your back or whatever it is, right? So in my view, the most important area to strengthen is your feet, because from there, now you've changed the entire game with what your body's going to be doing. And it does all come back down to alignment. Like the knees, for example, if that foot is pronated, now that knee has changed and collapsed, and now you're going to have that ballooning fascia on that medial side of the knee. So all these people that think they have knee fat, they don't. They have an incorrect alignment of the foot and the ankle, causing that collapsing and the ballooning. So then you go and you target in the gym, how do I get rid of this knee fat? And you're going to target the knee, and it's not going to do the job. In fact, you're probably going to compress and balloon even more. Or that hyperextension. If you're doing that work from a hyperextension in the knee, you've taken away that platform or that floor for that tissue that ends up becoming droopy because you've lost the foundation. You can't change that. People go and they'll have it like dealt with liposuction, and now you're just sealing your fate because you're actually taking away some of that tissue and you're locking that knee in hyperextension, which is going to impact the alignment of the pelvis. When the pelvis is impacted, now you've got compression in there causing ballooning of that lower belly, which a lot of people struggle with. Why am I bloated? Why does that lower belly always feel like I can't integrate this? Because your hip joints aren't correctly aligned, but it all comes back to what's going on in the feet. So that's where it gets really interesting, because when we start putting the time and energy into these parts of the body that we've kind of ignored, I mean, women will go for pedicures to get their toenails to look pretty, but they're probably not spending time releasing the fascia in the feet and strengthening. But that, in my view, is going to make some of the biggest changes in your overall physique, in how your body is moving, how you function, your range of motion, the energy. There's a saying, death starts in the feet, and there's a reason for that. It's the furthest from the engine. So when we make our feet a focus, then again, we can change the way that the body ages and how we feel and the strength that we have.
Yeah, and I feel like, so I've been in the gym for a long time, and I see a lot of amateurs in the gym that their foundation is very off, they can start throwing some pretty decent weight around, maybe squatting to 30, some even more weight than that, 100 pounds. And it's kind of saddening because I just know what it's doing to their body. But there's also people who have never done this and they have immaculate form and they really know what they're doing. They pay attention to their feet, to their knees, their hips. They like really work on it, and they started from zero, from no weight on their back to really perfecting the squat. Then they slowly add the weight. That's not how I did it though. Like I just like threw weight on my back and like, come on, more weight, more weight. I got to get strong for hockey. I want to impress the girls. I want to gain muscle. I want to look good. I want to beat up my older brother. Like these are my motives back in the day, which is pretty comical. And I think that's where the biggest issues start, when you're motivated from not necessarily a bad place, but you're trying to get there too quick.
You're motivated by ego.
Definitely.
As opposed to what is in the best interest of my cells.
Yeah. But nobody is aware of that at a young age, which makes it challenging. That's why it's important that we're like trying to educate people now with this. So yeah, I think the biggest thing if you are weight training is you have to strip the fascia. By that, I mean decompress the fascia in the entire body and just know where proper alignment is as number 2. Just throughout the day, positioning yourself throughout the day, because that's going to translate to how you train in the gym, and then rebuild your foundations and split that into the core, the lower, the upper body. Then you'll realize the core is connected to the lower body and the lower body is connected to the upper body. We're connected everywhere, but you need to start with these really minor, little intricate things because that adds up, and then drop the weight and just start from square one. And that's what I had to do, and it was the best decision I made. And there's still times where I'll go back in that process, I'll drop the weight, and I'll feel like, you know what, I feel like I'm doing something a little wrong here, I'm going to rebuild. So yeah, there's quite a bit to it.
And if you have things like, I see a lot of men in particular with stretch marks through here that are like really in the gym a lot, pumping up their chest and their arms, and those are those indicators that you're overstretching a few of those cells as opposed to integrating all of the cells.
Yeah, you forced it too much.
Yeah, so like blowing up a balloon 50 times and you get those stretch marks in the container. That's what's happening through here. And so those indicators are letting you know that, okay, I'm not actually doing what's good for me, because as I continue to work, I continue to block. So then I might have started with 50% of cells available to strengthen, but now maybe I'm 5 years in and I only have 35% of those cells. So if I want to maintain that size in my brain, well, I got to work harder. Well, no, you're just actually like causing more cells to get shut down, and you're having then to expand less cells, which is going to eventually cause those cell membranes to go. And it's all about the integrity of the cell membrane, because that's what fascia is. It's each of the cell membranes interconnected to every other cell. So as we continue to, shorten and get bigger, that's what's happening. We are pulling into the body those cells as opposed to keeping them where they should be, so that they can be part of the equation for how we use our body and how we move.
Absolutely. And a lot of people think like we're just tearing the muscle cell or the muscle fibers when you work out. It's not just that. Like the fascia's being caught in the mix, like everything's really being caught in the mix. So one of the biggest questions I get is, should I be blocking before or after I work out or perform exercise? And I think it's a fantastic question. So I've obviously tested this quite a bit, and I do both. But if I were to choose one, what do you think it would be?
Well, before, because you want to release the adhesions and correct that alignment before you then strengthen what you've just brought to the surface.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's say I know because even before I start throwing some weight around, I always do a mobility routine, make sure the correct muscles are firing, because I trained my body incorrectly, and there's still muscles that want to take over when they're not supposed to be. So I have to be very conscious of that. And I'll want to release certain areas if I'm doing a specific workout to optimize that workout. So definitely I would say if you had to choose one over the other, it would be block or do fascia decompression before you work out, and just really focus on your alignment. Make sure that you're awakening the cells, opening up the gates of flow to provide a better pump. If you really like weight training, you'll probably know what the pump is, because it's where the blood is just flowing, is full of oxygen, and you get that your muscles feel bigger in that moment because they are full of blood. And then what was the other thing I was going to mention?
I'm not sure, but I was just going to say that that's actually how we've created all of our programs. We release, then we rebuild. Release,
right, and
rebuild. We always do that release first, then we have the alignment training as that secondary part after the block.
Right.
And the breath.
Right. Oh yeah. And sorry, this is what I was going to mention, is also the breath. Like just doing the belly position before you weight train, that's probably the biggest thing you could do, because that's just going to start training you to access your diaphragm when you work out, whether that's cardio or weight training. Like the diaphragm is such an important component to anything you're doing. And if that's cardio, or even if you're doing squats, deadlifts to brace your core, to train yourself how to breathe diaphragmatically while you're in a braced position, that's so important.
And that's the thing, like, you know, especially when we're working out or we're increasing the metabolism in the body through activity, we have more exhaust, like a car, right? So we have more waste because now these cells are going through more interactions and waste is always created. So if we're breathing through that process, then we can move the waste that's created from the activity out of the body and reduce that amount of potential stiffness that may occur the next day.
Right.
So when we really get our body working efficiently, then we have the capacity to utilize it in so many different ways than if we don't. And it does come back down to that breathing. That's always going to be all of the other work that we're doing with fascia decompression is really to support the breath. Because again, when we collapse in the rib cage, now we're locking that diaphragm away. So that postural alignment piece is the key to support that alignment for the diaphragm to work most effectively. And if we have a diaphragm working properly lifelong, again, very different in how we will age, how we will function, how we will even view life, because the breath even dictates what's going on in the brain in a big way. So it's amazing. Like, I mean, we've all had moments where like you wake up in a crabby mood and your day is rotten, or you wake up with that, like, you know, really great impulse. This is going to be the best day of my life. And then you can go forward and your whole day is different based on your attitude. So just tying in the fact that the breath is key for all of this, because if we're waking up and we're sore and we're sluggish and we're toxic, we're going to have a very different feeling, even if the day is the same in what we do. Totally. We get in the car, we go to our job, we have our lunch or dinner, whatever it is, it's going to be a very different experience if your body feels like it's flowing with ease compared to if there's congestion.
Right. So we mentioned how block therapy is more of that performance tool. Let's call it that. That's the pre-workout. That's right before you go to the gym. You're decompressing, optimizing the breath, which we just talked about. But now people are probably curious about using it as a recovery tool. And that's more so where the post-workout would come into play. And I also think that's very important too, because if you just exhausted your body in the gym, and maybe you're an extreme athlete, you're a bodybuilder, a power lifter, you're doing extreme sports where your body is under tremendous amounts of stress, decompressing after a workout is very important too, because your body's also full of lactic acid. You'll want to start opening up the gates of flow because you just compressed. You just tore your muscles so that with the intention they can rebuild to be bigger and stronger. But again, fascia is also caught up in the mix. Fascia got more compressed, it got tighter, it could be strangling more cells. So you want to release that fishnet to allow the fibers and the muscle to repair properly. So it's important that the body is sending inflammation to the area that we just trained. There's a reason why it's doing that, to repair it, to bring all the nutrients to rebuild it and take the lactic acid out. So that would be a big reason to do block therapy after you weight train. And you also want there to be that inflammation, as I mentioned, but to also pump out the old inflammation. Because if you're really compressed and let's just say you just worked out your legs like crazy and you can hardly walk after, for a lot of people, the blood's just going to kind of pool there because their circulatory system isn't optimized because they're so compressed. So it's not actually pumping the old inflammation out and bringing in the new to repair it, just kind of stuck there. So that's where doing that would be extremely important. And then making sure you're not doing any type of cold shock therapy or something directly after you weight train. You want to, if anything, do a sauna, do something warm just to keep it relaxed, released, and allow that inflammation to go there and to rebuild properly. So that would pretty well be the other reason to block. And that would be post. So that's the pre and post. So that's the performance tool and the recovery tool.
Well, and there's also, different ways of blocking, right? Like we can simply lie on the tool, get into that rest and digest mode, or we can be active on the block with isometrics. So we can turn that practice into an exercise in and of itself.
Totally.
Through adding that component in, or we can just simply be there using the breath, allowing body weight and gravity to do the work in a really calm, relaxed way. You can even do that in bed. So we can take this practice to whatever end we want based on what our goals are and based on how we feel. And really, to me, the most important thing is, how do you feel, right? So if you're feeling really exhausted, you're thinking, okay, there's no way I can go to the gym, but hey, you can lie on that block. You can do it in bed. And then through that act alone, you may feel, okay, now I have a little more energy. So now I can get up and I can do a little bit more. So that's the thing. When you bring this practice and you make it your lifestyle, it really becomes not an exchange of other activity, but the foundation of all other activity, because this is going to teach your body how to do whatever it is that you want to do in a more balanced, symmetrical, conscious way. And the whole thing about this, become conscious. That's what fascia decompression teaches us. We become conscious not in the fact that, okay, my body is in perfect alignment. It's, okay, I'm aware that now when I'm standing, I feel I have more weight on that left foot, or I can now start to really see the twisting in my fascia. It gives you information, because we're never going to be perfect. So if we wait until we are, we're never going to do anything. Mm-hmm. So we're not suggesting that, like, don't exercise. What we're saying is learn first to become conscious of what correct alignment looks like. And then as you are working, you're going to start to see, and as you continue, you're going to start to see those more subtle pieces of information in your body. Like when I'm looking at my calves, and everybody, if you simply look in the mirror, if you really pay attention to the alignment of your calves, you'll notice that they're not the same. One leg, the fascia is going to have rolled more around the shin. There's going to be more mass on that outer part of the calf, that lateral part. And we should have basically a balance of that medial and lateral belly. And for some people, you can't even see that medial belly because the way the fascia has wrapped around so much. So start to pay attention to the symmetry in your body. How do your knees look? The kneecaps are going to be very different because they're responding to those forces. So one kneecap is going to look extremely different from the other. So these are those little prompts that make you realize, wow, I'm not symmetrical. And it's just information, but that information makes us conscious. And then when you become more conscious, you start to pay more attention. How am I lifting? Am I overusing one side of my body more than the other? And what can I do to create more symmetry in my movements all the time?
So it becomes fun, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because when you get to that point of being aware, let's say you're doing a push-up, to make it simple, or a squat, and you notice that, oh, like my right pec isn't like contracting or engaging as much as it should be. Okay, well, let's release these areas. Let's see kind of where it feels compressed. And now let's start focusing on how that muscle should be contracting properly. Then revisit, and then like, oh, wow, like I can actually feel that contraction. It's amazing how fast that can work too. It can literally be a position for some people, and they already notice a change in how the muscle contracts.
Or like that push-up, do you feel that thenar muscle on both hands is connecting to the floor the same, or does one hand have more of the weight on the outer component? Because again, just like the feet, that is going to create a whole different scenario up the chain, right?
Absolutely.
So those things are really fantastic when people can learn to experience their body through the motion instead of, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this for the end result. It's the journey, right? And make the journey be really exciting. Like, look at how your fingers are two fingers together more than the other. And again, it's not like we're going to go to that perfection right away, but it's the prompts and the awareness that we move ourselves toward that.
Yeah. And all those little movements and just being aware of little things like two fingers being closer together. Some people might not think that that's going to affect anything to do with their elbow or their shoulder or their upper back pain, but it all adds up. It's all part of the same system. That's what people need to get. It's one continual system. It's not just a muscle contracting a singular muscle that has the origin point and the insertion point, right? It's like the connective tissue has no beginning, no end. It's everywhere. So yes, it will affect everything up the chain and the entire body.
Well, and if symmetry is the goal, as far as bodybuilding as an example, if you stand in front of the mirror and you notice how your arms rest, likely you're going to see that one arm is more internally rotated than the other. So now with every single action that you're doing, that is changing the way you're using these muscles up through here. So again, you go to the gym and you think, okay, well, my left pec is bigger than my right pec. And then it's like, okay, well, now I have to do this, but that's not the answer. The answer lies in the releasing and then the strengthening. So people are jumping ahead and they're missing that release part, and they're creating more imbalance in the body as a result of trying to overwork the side that appears weaker because it's smaller. It's not smaller, it's just compressed and blocked.
Yeah. Well, and it could be smaller just because it's been compressed and blocked for so long that you haven't been able to contract those muscles.
When I say smaller, though, I mean like there's less cells that are integrated into that action, and you can't build those if they're blocked. No matter what you do, we have to release them so they can build into the equation.
Right. And that's like a pretty simplistic way of looking at it, which is good. Release and then just revisit that exercise. But for some people, they could have such rotation in their spine that just releasing a hand might not be the actual fix. And sorry, I know this is getting a little complicated for people or a little overwhelming, but it just shares how cool the body is, really. Because let's say I'm twisted more to my left side and I notice that my right pec just isn't wanting to work as much. If I just release the pec, sure, that can help a bit, but maybe like my rotation is still completely off. Well, and then I have to start rotating and strengthening the body in an opposite direction. This is why it's so important to release the entire body, going back to the basics, release the entire body and then rebuild everything, following specific movements, understanding where those micro foundations are, and making sure that your body can actually move. You have that mobility in all directions. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just work towards symmetry.
Well, and this is why we get back to the discussion of the feet, because if your upper body is rotating to the left, that left foot is going to be that flat tire drawing the body away. That right side's going to anchor to stop you from tipping over. And that's going to be because that left foot has flattened or pancaked and drawing away. So now you don't have that integration of the awareness of where that foot should be. So by bringing your feet into alignment, that's going to be what's going to stop that rotation to the left. And of course, there's going to be a whole bunch of cause sites built into that system that need to be addressed as well. But we cover that simply. And that's why, in our programs, we focus for 21 days on the lower body so that we can release, rebuild in little steps. And that's the important piece, because we can't release our entire system in one foul swoop and pull it back and then go from there. We need to take those little steps because fascia has layered over our lifetime. And so whatever age we are when we're starting this and becoming aware of it, we have all of those years accumulated. And what's happened along the way? I mean, if I had a really traumatic moment as a kid, that would have impacted my breath and I would have grown from that space. Maybe I had a really great childhood and then maybe I had a horrible car accident when I was in my 20s and that impacted my breath. Or maybe I was just born with a bad, with an incorrect breath, which especially today a lot of kids are because of a whole raft of reasons. That's a different topic we'll get into sometime. But nonetheless, again, it comes back to the breath. But the breath can't work if our cells are out of alignment. So the process is necessary in order to get to those cause sites, which is the key.
And what I really appreciate what you mentioned earlier is you can do block therapy as an exercise. So it doesn't matter where you're at right now. It doesn't matter your age, your gender, your condition. If you're a professional athlete or if you're in chronic pain, everybody can start to whatever degree it is. So nobody needs to feel hopeless and that there's no, where do I even start? You could start by just engaging your breath, just starting to kickstart and fire up your diaphragm. And that's just by doing that belly position and then training you, then bringing that conscious awareness there, and then you can explore outwards. And I think that's just what's so cool. Like, it just, so many people in our community aren't really wanting to do a ton of exercise, but I personally believe it's very important to do strength training, just because we don't have to be bulky and bodybuilders, but we need to be strong. We want to be able to get up and down the stairs with no pain, with ease, especially as we get older. We want to be able to get up and off of the toilet without pain, or to just have enough strength to do so. So just being able to do the basic stuff and making sure that pretty well all main areas of the body are relatively strong. Like we talked a lot about that too. It's like, people who are in back pain, doesn't mean don't train your back. It just might not be the first place that you're going to start training. You still want to train all muscles in the body. There's a reason why they're there. So
the thing is too, I think that we should really bring home here is that just using your body properly with what you do every day in itself is exercise. Like, sometimes we think we have to exercise and take time out of our day to exercise. Sitting here with correct alignment, for the person that's compressed, this is fatiguing to be able to sit up straight. So bringing conscious awareness into what we're doing all the time is exercise. Vacuuming, it's an exercise. Vacuum with the opposite hand. Be conscious of those movements, and then suddenly you don't have to take time out of your day. And for the person that can't walk up the stairs, simply walking up the stairs is a whole new exploration of movement that they might not have had before. So all of these movements that we have every day can be used as exercise. And I love always saying, we spend a lot of time rushing and waiting. we rush to get somewhere and then we wait. So use those times of waiting as times of self-care. If you're standing in line, stand consciously, root, become aware. How do I feel on my feet? Do I have 60% of my weight on my heels? Do I have more weight on one foot? Bring that awareness in. If you're sitting and you're waiting for something, okay, am I slumped over? Do I have equal weight on my sit bones? Do I feel like I'm rotated? Okay, well, what do I need to do to bring balance and symmetry into my body? So we can exercise without having to take time out for exercise, simply by becoming conscious of movement in our body. And that alone is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that will definitely make a big difference. And I think that is definitely a form of exercise. Like, even walking, it's a form of exercise. Like, doing whatever you're doing throughout the day is a form of exercise. And I think that's great. So yeah, I think we covered a lot in this episode. I think we covered a lot in a short period of time too, because we condensed a lot within this episode. So I'm sure we'll be having more conversations just around the whole like fitness, exercise, weight loss perspective. I know people have questions, so we can also do specific episodes based off of their questions and kind of clump them together and do some cool stuff there. So yeah, I think regardless where you're at, this episode will really help provide some sort of guidance. If you don't know who we are, Deanna and myself, then check out blocktherapy.com. You can download some of our free stuff. If you just want the sampler program that uses a rolled up towel, it's $9, and you get 9 videos, which teaches fascia decompression and some foundational strength building, which is obviously important.
And that's a great place to start. I mean, it's simple.
Pretty ideal, yeah.
You can do it immediately, and you're going to see those changes, especially with those first couple of days where we really get into the abdomen and we release those lower ribs to teach people to access that breath. That's the game changer. So, just start. Start.
Yeah. And the YouTube channel, like the Block Therapy YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, like there's a ton of information on there just to get you started.
Yeah.
And they're more specific, but still just get started. And then
the goal is quality, right? Quality. And if we have greater quality, we have greater longevity. So they're tied together, but we don't want to have longevity at the expense of quality.
Oh yeah, then there's no point. There's no point. The point, it's funny, I did a video on anti-aging, but the point isn't to live forever. That's not our point here on Earth. It's just to live a good quality life.
Thrive while we're living.
Exactly. We don't want to be in pain all the time. We don't want to be riddled with chronic pain. We don't want to have dis-ease. We don't want to have all these issues. We want to be able to regulate our body, make sure that it's optimized so that we can really enjoy all the quality of life and gain all that experience.
And that's what exercise should be for. And I was the one that was doing it for all the wrong reasons, and my body revolted against me, and it looked revolting, to be honest. I mean, it was not at all attractive, and it felt horrible, and it was toxic, and it was literally full of shit. So, yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, and yet I was spending hours a day trying to change it. I was forcing myself. Persuasion versus force. We want to be kind, but consistent. That's the key. Kindness, consistency, learn to use your breath, and then exercise becomes something that fuels your life, that becomes a pleasure as opposed to
Feel good.
some militant, thing that we have to do every day for something.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to feel good while you're exercising and after you've exercised. Like, sure, the next day, the next couple of days, you might be a little sore. It's like, that's pretty normal, but it shouldn't be to the point where you're always sore, you're always in pain, you don't feel great, whatever. Then something's just not right. So that's why this episode's for you. And a great start is to follow these protocols. So if that's everything, we'll end this podcast or this episode. So thank you all so much for joining. This has been a ton of fun, and we'll see you in next week's episode.